welcome everyone to the Flight Community Sync, July 2025. Um, Welcome if you're joining us. Regardless of where you're joining, you can drop your questions in the chat. That's true for LinkedIn or YouTube. So at any point in time, let us know if you have any question. I'm the Espejo. I'm part of the Union AI team, and I've been around the flight community for a couple of years now. Couple of project updates recently. One of them, probably the main one, is Flight version 2 is coming. We haven't had a major release in years, maybe, and this is coming, and it's huge. Probably it's not an upgrade. It's a total redesign from the ground up for Flight. Most of the things uh, you knew about Flight won't be true anymore in a good way. The system is being redesigned for extreme dynamism for the agentic era. So there are a ton of changes coming, and many of them you can be involved. I mean, the community can be involved in this. So I'm dropping here the link to a live stream just like this. That's probably better. Where no other than Keaton and other co-creators of Light will join to kind of describe the not only the vision, because this is not a vision on a slide deck. This is code that is working already, and he will probably live demo amazing stuff you can do now with Fly. I've already seen it, I've already used it, and I can tell you that's wildly different. So yeah, that's happening on July 29, 10 p.m. Pacific. So I'm leaving the link on the chat. It's also in the Union LinkedIn page in the event section. So yeah, you just need to click on attend so you get a reminder. So it will be really interesting to see you all there. And also a small public service announcement. As probably you all know by now, the flight docs were migrated to a new repo, and that repo is now public. So you can contribute, but not in the flight repo. We are about to change that. I mean, I proposed something in the contribute Slack channel. So you can go there and upvote or downvote. Because if you go to the repo, the flight repo, there's still a docs folder, and there's no indication that those docs are not rendered anymore into this doc site. So the docs have been migrated to a different repo. So I'll drop the link to in the chat right now. It's Union AI slash docs, the Union AI repo slash docs. But the repo is open. You can take a look and contribute. All right. Yeah, I think that's it in terms of announcements so far. So today it's really a pleasure to introduce Richard. Richard comes from the Domino Data Labs team, a team that's been full of bright minds, really, and they have been amazing contributors to Flight, finding those I mean nasty issues, nasty bugs, and fixing them, and also fixing security vulnerabilities and other stuff. So really happy to have Richard today. So yeah, welcome, Richard.
Yeah, thanks for the intro.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll start by just introducing myself. My
Yep,
name's
go ahead.
Richard, and I've been a software engineer at Domino Data Lab for 2 years, and I'm based in San Francisco. And yeah, I'll be talking a bit about how we use Flyte at Domino. So Domino is a unified platform for accessing data, tools, compute models, and projects across any environment. And my team at Domino is focused especially on the life sciences side. So think the context of clinical trials, clinical trial data analysis, those studies. All right, so I'll just jump into it. I'll start with some of the problems we faced at Domino with workflow orchestration and other issues, and how we landed on Flyte and a lot of its features as being able to solve some of these. So workflow orchestration in the context of clinical trials, you can imagine there's multi-job workflows where these different jobs need to run in parallel. They might have dependencies on each other, and things can get quite complex. So a workflow orchestrator to really solve these problems for us. And then data integrity and traceability, another key requirement in the clinical trial context. And so I'll highlight some parts of Flyte that make this pretty easy for us to solve with these immutable workflow outputs and the lineage as they go across our system. And then the last bit here is just about integration with Domino infrastructure. We have some different Domino like managed environments and file systems in our platform. And so just how we were able to integrate these with Flyte and make it all really seamless. So I'll start with the first topic here. And there'll be a bit of terminology, first of all. So I'll talk a bit about this. Those who are familiar with clinical trials this will just be a review of terms you've heard of. So first term, SDTM, Study Data Tabulation Model. So this is collected data in a clinical trial. Just that initial raw data is how you can think of it. ADAM data, analysis data model, analysis ready data set. So let's think of it as some data that's derived from that SDTM data. And then TFL, tables, figures, and listings. These are reports that for regulatory submission. And this one you can think of as something that is consuming the data from SDTM ADAM. All right, I'll walk through a sample clinical trial flow. I think this will help make things more concrete. I've labeled some of these nodes here. So these ones in orange are the first few nodes in this sample workflow I'm showing off here, where this SDTM data is loaded in. I have a few more nodes here in purple, and these have dependencies on those SDTM nodes. These purple nodes are all different types of ADAM data sets doing the processing and transformations and adding those derived variable fields. And these final few nodes I have in blue, the T underscore, these are the TFL report nodes, the ones that are generating these final TFL reports with dependencies on some of these initial data nodes. Yeah. So yeah, this is a great example of what a workflow in a clinical trial context might look like with all the dependencies and nodes that can execute in parallel and so forth. And then so when we were thinking about a workflow orchestrator, of course, there's some very basic criteria. Being able to define a workflow in code, execute a workflow, and track those executions, have these workflows produce some outputs, inspect those outputs, and download them. So, of course, these are all things Flyte could help us accomplish, and so that's great. Here, I'll also go over some more advanced goals that Flyte really shines. And so for context, we were definitely considering Flyte as well as other workflow orchestrators out there, Prefect, Argo workflows, Airflow. These are some y'all might have heard of. But yeah, so authentication, documentation, Documentation, Flyte docs, we found were quite comprehensive. Um, so in comparison to other workflow orchestrators, maybe. Flyte really shines. Authentication, another place. Flyte has like OIDC, some custom authorization that we were able to use and leverage. We also have retry tasks from failure. Just a very nice feature to have for failing workflow outputs. So yeah, the story around that, all these features here, we found that Flyte really shines, and I think that's the background for how we ended up going with Flyte for our workflow orchestration needs. So I just want to conclude this section. I reviewed some of our goals and criteria for a workflow orchestrator and how Flyte for us was a good match. Okay, let's jump right into the next topic. I'll leave it at that as an overview of how we arrived at Flyte. So for the next topic, data integrity and traceability. Again, I'll just start with a little bit of terminology here about Domino artifacts, the service that we have, and Domino governance. So for Domino artifacts, this is a service to surface some specially annotated workflow outputs. These are surfaced. We have workflow outputs in Flyte, and then in our artifact service, we are surfacing these workflow outputs outside of Flyte in our platform. And here, these are later integrated into other parts of our system, managed, etc. Domino governance. Here is a service where we build these in the clinical trial context, quality control pipeline, let's say. And so these pipelines or policies in our governance system are where we can define requirements for some final submission or deliverable, have these requirements be checked off one by one, and just have the quality control around those. That's a very clinical trial specific use case. But so governance is that service we have on our platform to manage all of these deliverables or submissions, policies, requirements. Okay, with that terminology, I'll talk a bit about this problem of data integrity and traceability. So clear end-to-end traceability from input data as it's transformed by a workflow, node to node, to those final registered outputs that might later then be surfaced in other services, and having the traceability of that throughout. So you know where your data, all its inputs are coming from. It's a very key requirement in the clinical trial context in these different regulated industries as well. So for this section here, I'll walk through the complete life cycle of a workflow output, starting from this where it's created, and then all the way to the very end when it's recorded in our system and consumed elsewhere. Just to give an idea of like what our needs were here and how Flyte really helped us to achieve this. And it starts right here with, I have a code snippet here. There's these Flyte artifact annotations, which we're leveraging here, and it makes it very easy to, in a workflow, have this. I have an output here, ADAE data, and it's simply adding this annotation here that marks this workflow output as special, as a so-called data artifact here. And then, yeah, now it's specially marked in the system, and we can see what happens next. And then this task here also has this input here, SDTM data. But yeah, we're focused more on this output, this ADAE data file. Okay, so Here's the workflow it's a part of. In red, I highlighted that node that's creating the ADAE data artifact workflow output. That's special, that we marked as special. All right. So this workflow will be registered into Flyte and executed. Once that workflow completes, we'll take a look at how it's further tracked here. All right, so within Flyte already handles kind of marking this output as special, and uh, it's all stored in blob storage and tracked in Postgres. And we have an API gateway that we've added on top of Flyte. I've shown in red here, our auth gateway. And so using different Flyte APIs, it's pretty easy for us to inspect these specially annotated workflow outputs, inspect them, download them. From here, we can record these outputs into our platform. So also in red here, I have this Domino DB where we might be recording these outputs. And then, so we have some services. They might come in on the left with some HTTP requests. They hit our gateway to query some of these specially annotated outputs. We then, it's recorded in our system, so it's very easy to handle those queries and so forth. So yeah, from here, it's easy for us to surface these special outputs across our services. Here's one place, back to that artifact service. We're surfacing that special output as a so-called artifact, flow artifact. And so you can see it has a name, Atom datasets, and right underneath it, it describes some links into other parts of the system, just to give an idea of how all that traceability is really looking like. And then for the governance service as well. So these specially annotated outputs, these are also surfaced, and they can be attached to some governed submission. This might be part of a submission that is going through those checklists of requirements, like I said, and that lineage is super important for just being present in that deliverable and having the link back so that it can be inspected, its inputs can be inspected, and so forth. So just to conclude here, data integrity and traceability, these are critical requirements in clinical trial context. And we found here that the design of Flyte artifact annotations, altogether, it makes it very easy for us to solve that critical requirement. And yeah, I've shown a kind of steel thread for the life cycle of workflow output, and we've seen how Flyte supports those goals of ours. All right. So integration with Domino infrastructure. All right. So there's a little bit of background here as well. Environments. I'll cover these somewhat high level. All right. So Domino environment. Here we have a managed, you can think of it as a managed Docker image with some customizations. So it's managed in the sense that these can be like named, permission set on them, deleted, etc. But yeah, you can think of it as a kind of special Docker image. Data storage. This specific one is named NetApp volume, but it's just a data storage. And you can think of it as a managed kind of NFS or EFS with some additional features, snapshotting. It can be deleted, managed, like renamed, copied, deleted. Okay. And this is some of the Domino infrastructure that we are really looking to integrate with into a Flyte job. Flyte Connectors, so this is that feature in Flyte that really enables us to do this. So Flyte Connectors are these async connectors that enable long-running jobs to execute on some external platform. And these are some example connectors that are uh, published out there. They connect to different external platforms, ChatGPT, Snowflake. And what we built was a Domino Flyte connector that is executing on our Domino platform, which is external to Flyte, right? So here is how that looks like in a workflow. So we've defined this, there's a run Domino task here, and we've defined this as a task that executes against this custom Domino Flyte connector that we've built. And so this all runs just seamlessly inside a Flyte workflow. So I have a workflow here. It's named Atom TFL. So it's generating those, let's say, Atom datasets and TFL reports. It takes in some input, and this is a task in that workflow. And it's a Domino task. It's a name, a command. And so it's a custom task, and it's as easy as specifying this environment name and this data storage NetApp volume. And having defined these are now the infrastructure that we specified for that job to run. So yeah, very, very simple for someone writing a workflow to use and have it integrate into our infrastructure. Once this workflow is defined like this, it will, again, register into Flyte. And so how that looks, maybe to dive into the architecture here, Flyte will create that task, and through the connector service, the task will eventually hit this custom connector that we wrote. This will submit a job to our system, running against all of our infrastructure, fully integrated, which is great. And yeah, that's basically the full story there. So I think in conclusion for this section, the Flyte connectors really makes it easy for us to run jobs on our platform, on our infrastructure against these environments, file systems, and everything else. All right. I'll go over what we all went over here. So workflow orchestration, we found that Flyte made this pretty easy for us. It matches our criteria, some of our advanced criteria, and yeah, really just seemed like a great choice. Data integrity and traceability. So for this, we found that Flyte artifact annotations made it really easy to mark a workflow output, trace it throughout an execution and outside of Flyte into our own services. And then finally, integration with our infrastructure. Again, we use Flyte connectors and found that it makes it quite seamless to run a Flyte task into in our Domino platform. Okay, I'll pause here. Thank you. Happy to take your
Thanks,
questions.
you, Richard. That was awesome. Thanks. All right. There's at least one question from the audience so far. So let's start there. How do you generally design your task flow? When do you decide you can separate a particular computation into two tasks?
Hmm. All right. Let me. Yeah. So I think what I did show is this sample workflow, which I think caveat is just a dummy workflow. Um, I'm actually not designing many flows in my day to day. I'm not sure. Okay. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. So I don't have a great answer to your question. Um, when you decide you can separate a computation. Yeah. We do have someone on our team, Ross Sharp. He's the director of solution architecture, and uh, he has a lot of experience designing flows. And so, yeah, I'll he might be here today, but if not, I'll check with him and see if he has a good answer for you about
Yeah, I
set.
think there's some guidance in at least in the old version of the docs. Let me drop the link here for everyone's benefit with kind of the characteristics of a flight task, which could give you an idea of when to separate. I think there's an additional guidance in another section. But yeah, to Mano Rajan, if you can join Slack community, we can continue the conversation there to give you uh, additional guidance beyond what Richard said. But yeah, the idea with task is that any process, any part of your process that it's independently executable that will generate an output that is can be passed to another part of the process is a good candidate to separate as a task. Uh, but yeah, that's part of the guidance. But happy to continue the thread there with Richard and the rest of the community. Awesome, thank you. Another question. This one from our good friend John Botta. Your experience of standing up flight for the first time when?
Yeah, that's a great
That was
question.
quite an experience, right?
Yeah. Mm, let's see. Yeah, I'll give my take on this. I think Ethan Brown, the tech lead on my team, has a ton of experience with this. But yeah, why don't I just give my advice here? Mm, I'll start with the advice. I have a slide for this. Uh, it's yeah. I wasn't gonna show this as part of the main talk, but for the documentation, of course, the union docs are great. They're actually like super comprehensive. We found there's some parts that are on GitHub too. So referencing across those was like super important for us for getting it stood up because there's really a lot of parts to it. Um, but yeah, I think yeah. Okay, I'll leave it at that. More recently, I think this is just general docs, but it might have some tips for standing up flight as well. But yeah, more recently, there's these I've linked here, deepwiki.com/flight. These are just some extra documentation. Uh, I don't have a great way of explaining how these are different, but yeah, I found that these are great as well. Um, okay, I see there's a follow up here. Yeah, so I'm also happy to follow up on Slack. I didn't prepare too much. Experience standing up flight. We did need to stand it up for different cloud platforms like AWS, Azure, GCP, and I think for other orchestrators this might just be impossible. But yeah, definitely possible with Flyte, and so we have some experience with that as well. So yeah, it's been difficult at times, but I think definitely, mm, yeah, with the docs and everything, it's all super helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Was trying to get Ethan into the session with audio, but so far, yeah, if you want to know more, Ethan and the team is more than open to share their experience in the onboarding on Slack. And yeah, they also contribute a lot during the process as they went. So thank you again. Oh, I had a small question. Something you mentioned as one of the reasons you pick Flyte versus other options. You
Mm,
mentioned the ability to retry from failure, and that triggers some um, memories in my head because yeah, it's one of the features that many users find useful and or other users struggle a bit to understand. So because for example, when you specify retries in the task configuration, that's retries for what Flyte consider user level errors, code level errors, let's say, which by default are not retried. And there's also a max system retries um, parameter that you can adjust for the cluster, and that's the retry budget for what Flyte considers system failure or system level failures. But yeah, that's not crystal clear for new users, I feel. So I don't know what was your experience during probably the onboarding on the retry logic in Flyte.
yeah. Mm, I'll follow that slide. Yes, retry
Yeah.
tasks. Mm, yeah, maybe it's a hindsight thing, but I thought it was pretty clear to me first learning about it. Um, hmm,
And I don't know if you have had any issues with, I don't know, propeller retries on map tasks and stuff. I mean, it's not that it's meant to fail, but sometimes we see strange patterns where there's a lot of parallelism, concurrency with retries. I mean, it's solid as a system, but sometimes it's not easy to debug. That probably will change significantly with version 2, but V1 will still be around. So
yeah,
just I was just curious, but if
yeah,
you haven't had issues, so
yeah. Tangential. I would say I remember. Mm, it's coming back. I remember for retries, there was something we were debugging a bit. This is if I'm here running a workflow and it fails at some task. Actually, yeah, let's say like you, David, can go in and retry that task. And so one thing we that was a little tricky for us is the permissioning around that. Like, should that task run as Richard Liu because I ran the workflow, or should it run as David because you're triggering the retry? I'll have to jog my memory on like either what we decided there or what did like we change in the code specifically. But I remember that was kind of a like a little bit of an edge case we were thinking about.
yeah, I think I also remember that, but can't remember
Yeah,
the
I think we
result.
did eventually do something good there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Nice. And yeah, thank you, Ethan, for the context. No dynamic, not map tasks to use only using connector to domino job. Nice. Thank you. Mhm. All right. I don't see any other questions. Again, feel free to drop them in the chat. If there's anything else, well, thanks so much, Richard, again. And by extension, thanks, Ethan. and the whole Domino team. You've been amazing contributors, users so far. Thank you for your contributions, for your patience, and yeah, for volunteering to be here. Um, all right. So with that, again, we will really recommend signing up for the event on July 29, introducing Flyte V2. Uh, all right. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Bye.